You will be married by Christmas, or you will be nothing at all. Julian Thornbury, 7th Duke of Iversley, did not at first understand that the words had not been spoken to him. He stood at the edge of the Lockmore conservatory with a glass of untouched claret warming in his hand, half hidden behind a bank of forced camellias, and for one absurd instant he believed some servant of his own conscience had followed him into the dark to say aloud the thing that had chased him for 3 years. Then he heard the answer, a woman's voice, low and steady, more weary than frightened, and he realized he had blundered into a conversation not meant for any ears but two. I understand the terms, uncle. You have made them very plain. Plain. I have made them merciful. Your father, God keep him, tied up every farthing and every acre so that you should not squander it on some fortune hunter, and now you stand there and look at me as though I were the author of your ruin. I am not the author of it, Marianne. I am only the man reading you the page. Julian did not move. To move would be to announce himself, and to announce himself would be to force a lady to know that a stranger had heard her named a beggar in a borrowed conservatory on the coldest night of December. So he stayed where he was among the camellias, and he watched. She was standing very straight beside the marble basin where a small fountain had been stopped for the winter, and the candlelight from the drawing rooms beyond fell on her in a long pale wedge. Not a girl in her first season, he saw that at once, and was glad of it, for the room beyond was full of girls in their first season, and he had spent the whole of the evening being hunted through them like a stag through a coppice. This was a woman of 5 or 6 and 20, with dark hair dressed simply and a gown 2 years out of fashion worn well because she carried herself as though fashion had never troubled her. Her chin was up, her hands, he noticed, were perfectly still. He had learned, over 38 years and a great deal of grief, that stillness in the hands was the surest sign of a person holding something at very great cost. The estate comes to me on my marriage, she said. Those were his words. Not on my 30th year, not on my good conduct, not on your approval, on my marriage. On a marriage I judge suitable, said the uncle, a florid, prosperous-looking man in a waistcoat that strained across a good dinner. Read the clause entire, if you insist on lawyering at me. The lands, the house at Fenwick, the whole of your mother's settlement, all of it passes to you upon your marriage to a gentleman of standing, contracted before your 27th birthday. And your birthday, my dear, falls upon the 6th of January, 12th night. You have until Christmas to be betrothed and the New Year to be wed, or the entire estate reverts to me and my sons, and you may go for a governess or throw yourself upon my charity, whichever your pride can better stomach. The woman, Marianne, said nothing for a moment. The little fountain would have covered a smaller silence. Frozen, it covered none of this. And you have made certain, she said at last, that no suitable gentleman comes near me. You have refused every card. You have told every acquaintance that I am promised elsewhere, or ill, or in mourning. You have kept me at Fenwick 11 months of the year and brought me to town only when the season is over. You did not merely wait for me to fail, uncle. You have built the failure with your own hands, stone by stone, and now you show me the wall and call it Providence. Julian felt the corner of his mouth move against his will. It was the first thing in the whole miserable evening that come close to a smile. The uncle's colour rose. You will not speak to me in that manner. I will speak to you, she said, in the only manner left to me, which is honestly, since I have nothing else to lose but the truth, and you have taken care that I shall lose that too before the month is out. She drew a breath. Good night, uncle. I find the air in here suddenly very close. She turned. She turned directly toward the bank of camellias and toward Julian, and there was no earthly way for a man of his height to remain unseen, and so he did the only thing a gentleman could do, which was to step forward into the candle wedge as though he had that instant arrived, and incline his head and say, "Forgive me. I came in search of quiet, and appear to have trespassed on a great deal of it." He had expected her to flush, to stammer, to flee. He had grown used, over 3 years of being the most eligible and most feared bachelor in 3 counties, to women who could not hold his eye for the length of a sentence. Instead, she looked at him. She looked at him with the flat, assessing, unhurried gaze of a person who has just been told the ship is sinking and is therefore no longer greatly impressed by weather. "You heard," she said. "It was not a question. I heard a good deal I had no right to. I will forget the whole of it by morning. How convenient a memory. I should like to purchase one. She glanced past him, to where her uncle stood purpling in the shadows. Mr. Bexley, here is the Duke of Iversley, come to hear you rehearse my disinheritance. I hope you are proud of your audience. Julian watched the uncle's whole bearing change in the space of a heartbeat, the way iron changes when a magnet is brought near it, every filing swinging round to point the same direction. The florid contempt vanished. In its place came a bow, so deep it was nearly a collapse, and a smile so sudden it might have been painted on with a brush. Your Grace. Bexley, Josiah Bexley, at your service. I had no notion. My niece has a theatrical turn. Your Grace, you must not regard a word of it. A little family disagreement, nothing more, the port after dinner and a young woman's nerves. I am 27 in a month, uncle, said Marianne, and I have not had nerves since I was 9. But she said it quietly, and to Julian, not to Bexley, and there was something in the dry exhaustion of it that he found he could not stop hearing. You must forgive my intrusion entirely, Julian said to the uncle in the voice he used to end conversations. I shall leave you to your family disagreement. And he bowed, and he left the conservatory, and he did not look back. Because a man in his position learned early that a backward glance was a promise, and he had promised no one anything in 3 years and did not intend to begin over a stranger's inheritance in a stranger's glasshouse. He had reached the head of the great stair before he understood that he was going to do something foolish. The ball at Larkmoor was the last great crush before the families scattered to their country houses for Christmas, and it had been, from Julian's first step across the threshold, an ambush. He had known it would be. He came to town so rarely now that his mere appearance set the whole marriage market ringing like a struck bell, and Lady Larkmoor, a determined and good-natured woman with 3 unmarried daughters and a 4th in reserve, had positioned herself at his elbow within 4 minutes and had not truly left it since. He had danced twice, because to dance once was an insult, and to dance 3 times was a betrothal. He had been introduced to 11 young ladies and had forgotten 10 of them. He had been asked, with the transparent cunning of the very rich, his opinion of the country around Fenwick, of the shooting in Gloucestershire, of the advisability of a March wedding as against a June one for a delicate constitution. He had, in short, spent 4 hours being appraised like a horse at Tattersall's, and the worst of it, the very worst of it, was that they were not wrong to appraise him. He was a duke, and he was unmarried, and he was 38, and he had a name to continue and a great house going quietly to sleep for want of a mistress, and every mother in that ballroom knew it, and every one of them was right. The trouble was Eleanor. The trouble was always, in the end, Eleanor. He came down the stair slowly, one gloved hand on the cold banister, and he made himself think it through the way he thought through everything now, coldly, at a little distance from his own chest, as though his life were an estate matter to be settled, and he the steward settling it. 3 years since Eleanor, 3 years since the fever took her in 11 days, between one Michaelmas and the next, and left him standing in a church he had built her at the top of the hill of Iversley with a ring in his pocket he had never had the chance to give. They had not even been betrothed. That was the thing no one in the ballroom knew, and no one ever would. He had loved her for 2 years and had been on the point, the very point, the letter half written on his desk of asking, and the fever had come, and now she was a marble name on a marble slab, and he was the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties, and every time a mother pressed her daughter's hand into his he felt the church at the top of the hill go a little colder, and he thought, I cannot. Not because I grieve, though I grieve, because I will not stand at another altar and mean it and lose it. I have not the courage twice. But he could not say that to Lady Larkmoor. He could not say it to the 11 young ladies or their 10 mothers. He could not say it to his own aunt, the formidable Dowager Duchess Augusta, who had written him 3 letters in a month upon the subject of the succession, and had ended the last with the single scored-through sentence, I did not bury your father to watch you bury the name. There was no one to whom he could say the truth, and so the truth sat in him like a stone in a well, and the whole machinery of society, kindly and relentless, went on grinding toward the wedding he could not bear and could not decline, unless he stopped on the last step. Unless he were already promised. The idea arrived whole, the way the worst and best ideas do, with the shape of it already complete before he had consented to think it. A man who was betrothed could not be hunted. A man who was betrothed could go to the country for Christmas, could sit at his own fire, could let the whole shrieking machinery of the season fall silent, because the one prize it wanted was already claimed, and a betrothal did not require love. It did not require an altar. It required only an announcement, a ring, a season of public appearances, and his mind turned, cold and quick, back up the stairs to the conservatory, a woman with a very great and very private reason to consent. You have until Christmas to be betrothed, the uncle had said, or the entire estate reverts to me. She needed a betrothal by Christmas to keep her fortune. He needed a betrothal by Christmas to keep his peace. Each of them needed precisely the thing the other could give, and neither of them needed the thing, the love, the vow, the altar, the risk, that made such arrangements ruinous. It was, he thought, standing very still on the last step of the Larkmoor stair with the music going on above him like weather, the most perfectly balanced equation he had encountered in 3 years. Two sums that cancelled. Two frightened people who could, between them, buy each other a winter's grace and part in the spring the better for it. He knew, even as he thought it, that it was madness. He knew that a duke did not offer a stranger a false betrothal in a glass house. He knew 100 reasons it would collapse. And he could name every one, and he found, testing them one by one against the memory of that flat, unafraid, unhurried gaze, the woman who had not had nerves since she was 9. That not a single one of the reasons frightened him half so much as the prospect of one more mother pressing one more daughter's hand into his under one more chandelier. He turned around. He climbed the stairs again. The conservatory, when he reached it, was empty of the uncle. She was still there, alone now, standing with her back to the door and her palm flat against the cold marble basin, and she did not turn when he came in, though he made no attempt to be quiet. He thought perhaps she believed him a servant. He thought perhaps she no longer cared who came in, having already lost the only thing the room could take from her. Miss Bexley said. Ashcombe, she corrected, without turning. Marianne Ashcombe. Bexley is my mother's brother, God help us both. My father was a better man and gave me a better name, which is nearly all he was able in the end to give me freely. Now she did turn. Her eyes found his and narrowed, not in fear, but in a kind of tired weariness, the look of someone who has learned that when a great man comes back it is rarely to do a small woman a kindness. Your Grace, you have forgotten the whole of it by morning, I think you said. It is not yet morning. No, Julian agreed, it is not. Which is fortunate, because I find I have not forgotten it after all, and I have come back to make you a proposal that I would be very much obliged if you would allow me to finish before you throw the fountain water in my face. For the first time, something flickered across that steady face, surprise quickly mastered. She folded her hands. She said in a voice as dry as a ledger, I have nothing to fear from you, Your Grace. I have already been ruined this evening by an expert. An amateur would be an anticlimax. Say your piece. And Julian, Duke of Ivesley, who had not spoken an unrehearsed word to a woman in 3 years, opened his mouth and told a stranger the truth. You require a husband by Christmas, he said. I require a betrothed by the same date. I propose that we supply each other's requirement and part in the spring, each of us richer than we met. He had not meant to say it so baldly. He had climbed the stairs composing something graceful, a careful edifice of hint and euphemism through which a lady might be led without ever being asked directly to consent to a deception. But the woman in front of him had the sort of eyes that made euphemism feel like an insult, and so he had abandoned the edifice on the top step and given her the naked thing, and now he watched to see whether she would ring for a servant. She did not ring for a servant. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she crossed to the little iron chair by the cold fountain and sat down, and folded her hands in her lap and said, Go on. Julian had negotiated the purchase of 3 farms, the drainage of a fen, and the reduction of a mortgage that would have broken a lesser house, and he had done all of it with less care than he now spent choosing his next words. You know who I am. You know, therefore, that I do not lack a fortune, and that whatever else is said of me, and a great deal is said of me, no one has ever said I did not pay my debts. If you consent to be publicly betrothed to me from tonight until the season ends, you will satisfy the terms of your father's will. You will be, in the eyes of the law and the eyes of your uncle, a woman contracted before her birthday to a gentleman of standing. The estate will be yours. I will settle it upon you by deed, separately and privately, before ever the banns are called, so that whatever befalls the betrothal afterward, your inheritance is beyond your uncle's reach forever. That part I will do at once, and in writing, and it will not depend upon anything you do or say. It is not the price of the arrangement. It is the proof that I am in earnest. He saw her go still again, the hands, the perfect stillness of the hands. And in return, she said, in return, I ask that you allow the world to believe, for one winter, that the Duke of Iversley is a settled man. That is all. I ask you to stand beside me at a dozen dinners and be seen, to let it be printed that we are engaged, to come to Iversley for Christmas, because a man does not spend Christmas apart from his betrothed, and every dowager in England would smell the fraud if I did. To wear a ring, and answer to it, and hold your countenance under a great deal of scrutiny, for you will be scrutinized, Miss Ashcombe, more cruelly than you can imagine. The woman who catches the unattainable Duke is not forgiven for it lightly. And then, in the spring, when the succession has stopped being a matter of public speculation, and the mothers have turned their guns upon some other unmarried man, we quarrel. Amicably, we discover we do not suit. You retire to your own estate, a wealthy and independent woman with a broken engagement behind her, which is a thing society forgives in an heiress far more readily than it forgives a governess, and I retire to mine, having bought myself one quiet Christmas at the cost of one winter's performance. Marianne Ashcombe was quiet for a while. Somewhere above and behind them the orchestra had begun a country dance, and the floor of the ballroom shivered faintly with 200 feet, and the little frozen fountain caught the sound and did nothing with it. "Why me?" she said. "You do not know me. You heard, at most, 4 minutes of the worst quarter hour of my year. You could have had this arrangement. You could have had it far more safely, with any of a dozen women who would have understood it perfectly and asked nothing, and would have known, being of your world, exactly how to play it. Why offer it to a stranger you found weeping in a glass-house?" "You were not weeping," said Julian. "No," she admitted, "I was not. But you did not know that when you came back up the stairs." He considered the question honestly, because she plainly deserved an honest answer, and because he had discovered, in the space of 10 minutes, that he did not wish to lie to this particular woman more than the arrangement strictly required. "Because the women of my world," he said, "would understand it too perfectly. Every one of them would consent, and every one of them, in her secret heart, would set to work turning the false thing true. She would come to Iversley for Christmas, and by 12th night the ring would be real, and the quarrel forgotten, and I would find myself married in fact to a woman I had meant to be married to only in the newspapers. I do not wish to be married, Miss Ashcombe. Not to any of them. Not, forgive me, to you. I wish only not to be hunted, and a woman who does not want me is the only safe partner in a false betrothal. But she alone has no reason to make it real. You do not want a husband, you want an estate. I can give you the estate without the husband. You are the one woman in that entire ballroom to whom I am worth precisely nothing but my usefulness, and that, Miss Ashcombe, is the most reassuring quality a partner in this venture could possess." He watched, half-braced, for the offence to land. It did not. Instead, something moved at the corner of her mouth, something that on a less exhausted face would have been the beginning of a laugh, and she said, "You are the strangest man I have ever met, and I include my uncle, who once dined with a portrait of himself. You have told me you find me undesirable in order to persuade me to become engaged to you. I do not think there is a book of etiquette in England that has anticipated this evening." "There is not," Julian agreed gravely. "I have looked." And she did laugh then, one short, surprised breath of it. Quickly swallowed, but real, and he saw the whole architecture of her face change when it happened, the tiredness lifting for half a second to show some younger and quicker underneath, and he registered the change with a sort of distant, cataloguing interest. The way he might note that a room he had thought plain had good bones. Then it was gone, and she was grave again, and she said the thing he had been waiting for. "I have conditions." "Of course you have. The settlement first." The deed to Fenwick and my mother's portion, drawn by your man of business and mine together, signed and sealed and beyond recall, before one word of any betrothal is spoken aloud to a single living soul. If I am to trust a duke I met at 11 o'clock, I will trust him on paper and nowhere else. Agreed. My solicitor is Mr. Paget of Lincoln's Inn. He will wait upon yours tomorrow. Name yours. Mr. Truscott of Chancery Lane. He was my father's, and he is honest, which I understand is unusual in the trade. She drew a breath, and her hands, he saw, had come together again. Second condition. No falsehood between us. To the world whether we must. To each other, never. If we are to deceive 200 people at once, we cannot afford to be deceiving each other as well. The ground is treacherous enough without our building traps in it for our own feet. Whatever this is, it is honest between the two of us, or I will not do it. I have had enough of being lied to under my own roof. I will not walk knowingly into a house of it, even a warm one. Julian, who was at that moment concealing from her the entire existence of Eleanor, and the church at the top of the hill and the true and shameful reason he could not marry, said, "No falsehood between us," and heard his own voice do it perfectly, without a tremor. The way 3 years of grief had taught him to say anything at all. He told himself it was not a lie. Eleanor was not the arrangement's business. A man was entitled to his own dead. It was not a falsehood to withhold a grave. It was only decency. He told himself this smoothly and completely, and if some colder part of him noted that he had, in the very hour of promising honesty, made his first private reservation, he did not choose to hear it over the country dance. Third, said Marianne. When it ends, and it will end in the spring, as you have described, it ends cleanly, and it ends kindly, and neither of us permits the other to be made a fool of before the world. I will not have people say the Duke was jilted by a nobody, and you will not have them say the nobody was thrown over by the Duke. We will contrive a story in which no one is the villain and no one is the fool, and we will hold to it, both of us, for the rest of our lives, whatever else may come between us, even if we should quarrel in truth. Even if we should come to dislike each other extremely, which on present acquaintance I think entirely possible. That last, said Julian, seems to me the likeliest clause in the contract, and therefore the one I sign most readily. He inclined his head. Agreed. All three. Have you a fourth, or may I fetch you a chair that is warmer than iron? A fourth. She looked up at him, and the wariness had not entirely left her. He did not suppose it would leave her for weeks, if it ever did, but under it now was something steadier, a decision being made in real time behind those level eyes. You will not, at any point in this winter, feel sorry for me. You will not pity me. My uncle has spent 11 years pitying me to my face while robbing me behind my back, and I have come to regard pity as the mask a man wears when he means to take something. I would rather you despised me. I would very much rather you ignored me, but I will not be pitied by a duke in his own house at Christmas, while I am eating his food and wearing his ring, and if I catch you at it, I will tell you so, and you will stop. Those are my terms, your grace. I keep no others in reserve. If you can meet them, we have a bargain. If you cannot, I will thank you for a diverting quarter hour and go home to compose my letter to the governess agency. Julian looked at her for a long moment. The camellias breathed their heavy scent into the cold air. The orchestra above them turned the corner of the country dance and began again, and he thought not with his heart, which he believed to be safely dead, but with the cold cataloguing part of him that had run an estate through 3 years of grief, that he had come up the stairs meaning to hire a convenience and had instead met a person, and that this was going to complicate matters, and that he had no intention whatever of allowing it to. I can meet them, he said, all 4, and I will add a 5th of my own if you will permit it. Add it, that when we quarrel in the spring, and you retire to Fenwick a wealthy woman, and I retire to Ivesley an unhunted one, we do not pretend afterward that we did not know each other. I have very few acquaintances left in the world whom I'd not inherit or hire. I should like to keep the one I made tonight. If the keeping costs neither of us anything, you need not answer now. Consider it a note in the margin. Something crossed her face that he could not read. It was gone too fast and the light was too poor, and she rose from the iron chair and put out a hand not to be kissed, but to be shaken plainly and squarely, the way a man shakes on a purchase of land. Then we are agreed, your grace, said Marianne Ashcombe. Heaven help us both. He took her hand. It was cold and steady and stronger than he had expected. Julian, he said, if we are to be engaged by breakfast, you had better learn to say it, and I had better hear it in your mouth once before you must say it in front of my aunt, who will be watching us the way a hawk watches a hedge. Julian, she said, testing it, and it was strange to him how strange it was to hear. His own name, which the whole world used as a weapon or a lever, laid down between them plainly, like a coin on a table. Very well, Julian. And you had better call me Marianne and mean it, because Miss Ashcombe from a betrothed man will hang us in a week. Marianne, he said. And that was how it began, not at an altar, not on a knee, not a ring or a rose or a single word of love, but with a handshake over a frozen fountain, between two people who had each decided, quite separately and for reasons neither would confess, that the other was safe precisely because neither of them intended to fall. The deed was signed on a grey morning 9 days before Christmas, in Mr. Truscott's dim office in Chancery Lane, with a fire that smoked and a clerk who wrote a beautiful hand, and a great deal of sealing wax the colour of dried blood. Julian watched Marianne read every clause twice, her finger moving under the lines, her lips forming the Latin where the deed lapsed into it, and he thought that he had never in his life seen a person read a document as though her survival depended on it, because he had never before been in a room with someone whose survival did. When she reached the end, she looked up at Mr. Truscott, and then at Mr. Paget, and last of all at Julian, and she said only, "It is what he said it was," and signed her name, Marianne Eliza Ashcombe, in a firm round hand that did not shake at all. Then she pressed her ring into the wax, and the estate at Fenwick, and her mother's whole settlement, passed out of the reach of Josiah Bexley forever, and Julian saw her hand, when it left the wax, tremble at last once, before she folded it into the other and was still. "There," he said quietly, when the solicitors had withdrawn to fetch the copies. "Whatever else the winter does to us, it cannot do that. You are your own woman now, Marianne. Before ever we tell a soul we are engaged. If you wish to walk out of this office and never see me again, the door is there, and the deed is yours, and I will bear the jilting with what dignity I can muster." She looked at him for a moment across the smoking fire. "You gave me the estate before you had the betrothal," she said. "You gave me the whole of your leverage before I had given you a farthing of mine. That was either very stupid or very honourable, and I have not yet decided which." "They are frequently the same thing," said Julian. "It is one of the great inconveniences of trying to behave well." He rose and drew on his gloves. "I did not do it to bind you. I did it so that nothing between us this winter should ever be able to be about the money, because I have watched from a distance what the money did to you, and I did not care to see it do the same to whatever this is to become. Now come. My aunt expects us for dinner, and if we are half an hour late she will have decided we were quarrelling, and if we are prompt she will decide we are indifferent, and there is a narrow window of about 11 minutes in which she will believe we are in love. I mean to arrive inside it." Marianne stood and shook out her skirts and put on her bonnet, and became, between one breath and the next, the woman she had decided to be for the winter, chin up, hands still, eyes level. "Then let us not keep the Dowager Duchess waiting," she said. "I have never deceived a duchess before. I find I am looking forward to it more than is entirely respectable." The Dowager Duchess Augusta lived in a tall, thin house in Grosvenor Square, with a footman for every year of her age, and a drawing-room so thick with the portraits of dead Thornburys that a newcomer felt at once outnumbered and under judgment. She was 71, straight as a fireplace poker, and possessed of the two sharpest eyes Julian had ever tried and failed to hide anything from. She had raised him from the age of 9, when his mother died. She had buried his father and 2 of his uncles. She had wanted, with a single-mindedness that had governed her every letter for 3 years, one thing only from her nephew before she died, which was to see the succession secured and the great cold house at Iversley have a mistress in it again. And she loved him, ferociously, in the manner of a woman who had never once in her life said the word aloud, and would have gone to the block sooner. She received them standing. She looked at Marianne for the length of time it takes to read a will. And then she said to Julian, over Marianne's head, "So this is she." The one you have kept from me for a fortnight while the whole town shrieked the news before you had the grace to send it me in your own hand. Sit down, girl. You are making the footman nervous. Julian, you may pour the sherry, and you may tell me at once how you contrived to persuade a woman with sense in her face to marry you. For I have been trying to marry you off for 3 years, and I had begun to think it could not be done by fair means. It could not, said Marianne, sitting quite composed. I understand it was done by unfair ones. Your Grace, I am given to understand you did not expect me, and I do not blame you. I did not expect me either. A month ago I was a woman with no prospect in the world, but a governess's post in Northumberland, and now I am told I am to be a duchess, and I confess the transformation has the flavour of a thing one reads in a chapbook rather than a thing that happens to actual persons. If you mean to disapprove of me, I would take it as a kindness if you would do it now, plainly, while the sherry is still cold, rather than by degrees over the soup. There was a silence in the crowded drawing-room. Julian, pouring the sherry, kept his eyes upon the decanter and his face upon nothing, and thought, she has ruined it. She has been honest with the one person on earth who cannot be managed by honesty, and now the dowager will see straight through the whole design in a single evening. The dowager Duchess Augusta stared at Marianne for a long, terrible moment, and then she laughed, a short, cracked, astonished bark of a laugh, the laugh of a woman who has not been surprised in a great many years and finds she has missed it, and she said, Julian, at last. I had begun to fear you would bring me one of those milk-faced Larkmoor girls who says as your Grace pleases to a question of whether it is raining, give me the sherry, nephew, and give her a larger glass than mine, for she has earned it. Northumberland, was it? A governess's post? You shall tell me the whole of it over dinner, girl, and you shall not spare your uncle, for I have met Josiah Bexley twice and disliked him thoroughly both times, and it will do my digestion good to hear him abused by someone he cannot rob. Julian handed round the sherry and did not trust himself to speak, and across the room he caught Marianne's eye for the briefest instant, and saw in it a flicker of pure, wicked triumph, quickly hidden, and felt, to his considerable alarm, an answering flicker in his own chest. The unmistakable warmth of a conspirator who has watched his fellow conspirator carry off an impossible throw. It is only the pleasure of the game, he told himself. It is only relief that she did not sink us. It is nothing to do with her. And he believed it, because he had grown very skilled at believing things. Dinner was long and lit by a great many candles, and warmer than any table Julian had sat in 3 years. The Dowager Duchess, once won, was won entirely, and she interrogated Marianne through 5 courses, with a rudeness so complete it circled all the way round to affection. She learned that Marianne's mother had died when Marianne was 14 and her father when she was 20. That Fenwick had been let go half to seed under Bexley's stewardship while its rightful mistress donned her own stockings in a cold back bedroom. That Marianne had taught herself Italian from her father's books and read Latin better than most of the men Julian had been at school with. That she had never in her life had a season a dowry paid out, or a suitor her uncle had not personally frightened off. And Julian, listening, watched the dowager's face soften by imperceptible degrees, and watched his own careful design begin, very quietly, to slip out of his control. Because he had planned a betrothal that no one need feel anything about, and his aunt was plainly beginning to feel a very great deal. She is not what I looked for, the dowager said to him afterward, in the hall, while Marianne was fetching her cloak. She said it low, and she gripped his arm with a hand like a bird's claw, all bone and iron. She is a great deal better. Do you know it, Julian? Do you see what you have found, or are you too much a fool with grief still to see anything at all? Julian went very still. Grief, he said carefully. I am old, nephew, not blind. I know why you have not married. I know what you lost, that Calmer's, though you never told me and never let me name it. And though half the world thinks you cold, I have always known you were only frozen. Her grip tightened. But a frozen thing can thaw, Julian. That is the whole of the difference between frozen and dead, and it is the difference between you and your father, who was dead in the heart at 40 and made your mother's life a winter for it. Do not be your father. This girl is a fire. Warm your hands at her, you great stubborn creature, before the 2 of you invent some reason to put it out. And Julian, who could not tell his own aunt that the fire was hired by the month and would be extinguished by contract in the spring, said, You go too fast, Aunt. We are barely acquainted, and heard how thin it sounded even to him, and was saved from saying anything worse by Marianne's return with her cloak, and by the dowager's kiss upon her cheek, a thing, the footman said afterward below stairs. They had not seen the old Duchess give to any living soul in a decade. In the carriage, rolling home through the black glitter of the December streets, Marianne was quiet a long while. Then she said, without looking at him, "Your aunt loves you very much." "My aunt," said Julian, "has an unfortunate tendency to see fire where there is only a well-arranged performance. I must apologize for her. She embarrassed you." "She did not embarrass me." Marianne turned her head, and in the passing lamplight he could see that the composure had come off her like a coat set down. She looked, for a moment, simply tired and young and unbearably honest. "She made me wish I were the thing she thinks I am, which is a cruel trick for the world to play on a person who has only ever asked it to let her keep her own house. That is the danger in your plan, Julian, and I do not think you have reckoned it. It is very easy to perform being loved. What is hard, what I did not think of, and you did not warn me, is being loved in earnest by people you are deceiving, and having to hold still and let it happen, and know all the while that you are stealing it. Your aunt kissed my cheek. I have not been kissed on the cheek by anyone in 6 years. She looked back to the window. I did not expect the fraud to cost me anything. I find it is going to cost me a great deal. I only tell you so that you will know I am paying it with my eyes open." Julian sat in the dark of the carriage and found he had nothing to say. He had reckoned every sum but that one. He had thought of the money, the ring, the announcement, the quarrel, the clean parting in the spring. He had not thought that kindness could be a debt, that being loved by mistake might be a theft, that his convenient stranger had a heart in her after all, and had just told him, plainly and without self-pity, that his winter's arrangement was going to break it a little, and mean to see it through regardless. "Marianne," he said at last. "Do not," she said gently, "whatever it is, do not say the kind thing. We agreed I was not to be pitied, and I meant it, and I will hold you to it though the heavens fall. Say something dry, say something ducal and cold. I can bear this winter on those. I cannot bear it on kindness." So Julian looked out at the black river of the street, and after a moment he said, in the flattest, coldest, most ducal voice he owned, "The wine at my aunt's table was corked, and she will not be told. And I have suffered it in silence for 11 years. And he heard Marianne let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something else, and she said, "Thank you," very low, and they rode the rest of the way home in a silence that was, for the first time, not quite the silence of strangers. Vesley in winter was a great grey ship of a house riding at anchor above a white sea of park, and Julian had not brought a guest to it since Eleanor. He had forgotten, in 3 years of eating alone at the foot of a table built for 40, what the house did to a person coming to it for the first time, the long approach up the avenue of leafless limes, the way the whole west front rose out of the snow all at once as the drive turned, the 400 windows catching the last of a red December sun and throwing it back like a wall of low fire. He watched Marianne see it. He watched her not gasp, which every other visitor in his life had done, and instead go very quiet and very still. And he understood that she was doing the same thing he did every time he came home, which was reckoning the cost of it, the coal, the candles, the 40 servants, the acres, the weight, and finding it not beautiful but heavy, the way a thing is heavy that a great many people depend upon. "It is too large," she said finally as the carriage rocked to a stop before the doors, where the whole household stood ranged upon the steps in the cold to receive their master's betrothed. "You cannot possibly warm it." "No," Julian agreed. "I have never once been warm in it. That is the truest thing anyone has said to me about this house in 20 years, and you have said it before you have set foot in the door. Come." They have been standing in the snow for half an hour to look at you, and they will love you if you learn 3 of their names before spring, and the housekeeper is Mrs. Dean, and she rules me utterly, and you had better make an ally of her within the week. She learned 9 names by the following morning. Julian, who had lived at Ivesley for 38 years, and could not have named the 3rd under gardener to save his soul, watched her do it and revised, quietly and against his will, another of his assumptions about her. He had cast her as a survivor, hard, wary, guarding herself. He had not reckoned on the other thing, which he saw over the following days as the house filled for Christmas and the neighborhood came to call, that she was, underneath the weariness and because of it, extraordinarily kind. In the specific and unglamorous way of a person who has been overlooked her whole life, and has therefore made a study of noticing others, she noticed the scullery maid with the burned hand and had a salve sent down. She noticed that old Mrs. Dean's knees pained her on the stairs and contrived, without ever saying so, to have their conferences in the housekeeper's own parlour. She noticed which of the tenants' children were thin, and how the schoolroom roof let in the wet, and the exact degree to which the vicar's wife was frightened of the Dowager Duchess, and she set about all of it not as a duchess dispensing charity, but as a woman who had been cold and hungry and frightened herself and had not forgotten the geography of it. And the house, which had been asleep for 3 years, began, slowly and then all at once, to wake. Julian felt before he understood it. He came down one grey morning a week before Christmas and heard something he had not heard in the great hall of Iversley since before Eleanor. Laughter, low and warm, several voices of it, coming from the direction of the servants' end. He followed it and found Marianne on a stepladder in the long gallery, up to her elbows in holly and ivy and trailing bright ropes of it, with 2 housemaids and a footman, and the vicar's terrified wife all handing her greenery and all, every one of them, laughing at something she had just said. And the winter light coming grey and pure through the tall windows, and the whole grim gallery hung suddenly with living green as though the forest had come indoors to keep them company. She had a smudge of dust across one cheek, and a sprig of holly caught in her hair, and she was, in that moment, entirely unaware of being watched, and Julian stood in the doorway and looked at her and felt something in his chest that he had spent 3 years making very sure could not happen again shift, quietly like a great stone settling. He did not name it. He was far too practiced at not naming things. He told himself it was pleasure at seeing the house alive. He told himself it was gratitude to a woman doing her part of the bargain handsomely. He told himself a dozen safe and reasonable things, and every one of them was true, and none of them was the whole of it, and he knew it. And he turned and went back up the stairs to his study and sat at his desk and did not do any work at all for the better part of an hour. The performance for society, meanwhile, went off better than he had dared to hope. They dined out. They were dined. They went to the assembly at Markholt, and to the Boxing Day hunt breakfast, and to the great open house the county held between the holidays, and everywhere they went the same thing happened, which was that people who had come to sneer at the nobody who had caught the unattainable Duke went away. Within the hour, disarmed. She did not try to be liked. That was the secret of it, Julian came to see. She had spent too long being disliked to have any hope invested in the good opinion of strangers, and so she met the sneers and the raised brows and the whispered speculations with a flat, unbothered courtesy that gave them nothing to catch on, and the sneerers, finding no purchase, slid off, and found to their surprise that they respected her. She was witty without being cruel. She was informed without being showy. She contradicted the pompous Sir Harry Vane on a point of Roman history in front of 40 people, and was proved right and did not gloat, and Sir Harry, who had never in his life been gracious about anything, was heard afterward to call her a devilish sensible woman, which from Sir Harry was a sonnet, and they played their parts. This was the thing Julian had not anticipated, and it was the thing that undid him by inches over that long green Christmas, that the performance of tenderness, repeated night after night, in public, under 100 watching candles, became indistinguishable from the inside, from the thing itself. He offered her his arm, and she took it, and her hand rested in the crook of his elbow, and it was for the crowd, and it warmed him through his coat regardless. He bent his head to hear her over the noise of a supper room and caught the scent of her hair, and it was for the watching dowagers, and it stopped his breath regardless. He watched her across a crowded floor, deliberately, so that the room might see the Duke watch his betrothed. And the watching became, somewhere along the way, no longer a performance at all, but a thing he simply did, helplessly, whenever she was in a room, because his eyes had learned where she was and would not be trained to look elsewhere. They fell into a habit, in the evenings, of sitting up after the house had gone to bed, It had begun as strategy, comparing notes, aligning their stories, deciding what the world should be told about the state of their affections. But the strategy took less and less time, and the sitting up took more and more, and by the week of Christmas it had ceased to have anything to do with strategy at all. They sat in the small library, which was the only warm room in the house, with the fire built high and the great house creaking and settling in the frost outside. And they talked. He had not talked, truly talked, without weighing every word for what it might cost him, since Eleanor. He found he had forgotten he knew how. She drew it out of him without seeming to try, by the simple and unnerving method of being entirely honest herself, so that dishonesty in her presence felt not dangerous but merely rude. She told him about her father, and the cold back bedroom, and the 11 years of her uncle's slow theft. She told him she had wept exactly twice in that time, once for her father and once for a dog, and considered the dog the greater loss and did not care who knew it. She told him she had taught herself not to want things, because wanting was the lever the world used, and she said this lightly, as a joke against herself. And Julian sat in the firelight and understood that it was the saddest thing he had ever heard a person say, and that she'd not know it was sad, which made it sadder still. And he told her, not about Eleanor, never about Eleanor, that door stayed shut and bolted, but about the house and his father, and the particular loneliness of being the thing everyone wanted and no one knew. He told her about the church at the top of the hill and did not tell her why he had built it or who slept under its floor. He said only that he had built it and that he did not go there, and she looked at him for a moment across the fire and did not ask. And he was grateful to her for not asking with an intensity that frightened him, because it meant her not asking had become something he needed. "You are hiding something," she said to him one night, quite gently near midnight, with the fire low. She did not say it as an accusation. She said it as one might name the weather. "I do not ask what. We agreed I would not, and I will not. But you should know that I know, so that you are not deceived into thinking you have deceived me. There is a locked room in you, Julian. I feel the door of it every time we come near it. I only tell you that I feel it, and that I am not going to try the handle, so that we may go on comfortably as we are, you keeping your locked room and I mine, and neither of us pretending the doors are not there." Julian looked into the fire for a long time. The clause of their bargain, no falsehood between us, sat in the room with them like a third person. He could tell her now. He could open the door. He could say, "There was a woman named Eleanor, and I built her a church, and I have been afraid ever since to want anything I might lose." It would take a minute. It would be the honest thing. It would honor the clause he had promised and had, in the withholding, quietly broken every single day since. He did not do it. He told himself it was to protect the arrangement, that a betrothal built to be dissolved in the spring had no business excavating the graves of its architects, that Eleanor was his and not the winter's, that opening the door would only complicate a thing designed to be clean. All of that was true. And underneath the true reasons was the reason he would not look at, which was that he was afraid, not that Marianne would judge him, but that she would understand him, completely and at once, the way she understood everything. And that in being understood he would feel the last of the frost go out of him, and then he would want, and wanting was the lever the world used, and he had sworn after Eleanor never to hand the world that lever again. So he said, "You have your locked room and I have mine, and we will go on comfortably as you say," and he watched something in her face close very slightly, a door easing to, and he knew he had chosen wrongly and did it anyway, because a coward with a dukedom is still a coward. And the grandest house in 3 counties cannot warm a man who has decided to stay cold. There was a night, in the middle of that green fortnight, that Julian afterward marked as the night the arrangement died and something else was born in its place, though at the time he called it nothing at all, and would have denied to his own reflection that anything had happened. It was the night of the ice. A great frost had gripped the country for 3 days, and on the second the long ornamental water below the terrace at Ivesley froze from bank to bank, a black glass sheet 1/4 of a mile long, and word of it went round the estate the way such things do. And by the afternoon of the 3rd day half the household, and a good part of the tenantry had come down to skate upon it by the light of a moon so bright it threw shadows. Julian had not been down to the ice in 3 years. He had not been down to anything in 3 years. But Marianne had heard the children laughing from the schoolroom windows and had gone out in her worn cloak with her breath smoking and her eyes bright. And Mrs. Dean had come to fetch him with an expression that brooked no refusal. And so the Duke of Ivesley found himself, for the first time since Eleanor, standing on the bank of his own frozen water at night with a pair of his grandfather's skates in his hand and no earthly notion of how to decline. Marianne could not skate. This delighted the assembled estate beyond measure, for she had come among them a fortnight since, already half a legend, the clever, kind woman who had woken the sleeping house, and to discover that she could be made to shriek and windmill and clutch at a footman's sleeve like any ordinary mortal, endeared her to them past all bearing. Julian, it emerged, could skate, had skated as a boy, before the weight of the house settled on him, in the years when his mother was alive and the water froze and no one had yet taught him to be afraid of joy. His body remembered it though his mind had forgotten. He put on the old skates and pushed off, and the 3 years fell away under his feet, and he cut a long, clean curve down the black glass in the moonlight with the whole estate cheering, and when he came back to the bank Marianne was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her before, unguarded and astonished, as though she had caught the cold-locked Duke in the act of being a person. "Teach me," she said. "I have never in my life done a single thing purely because it was foolish and delightful and served no purpose whatever, and I find at nearly 27 that I should like to begin, and I should like you to be the one to teach me, since you are apparently a great deal more foolish and delightful under all that granite than you have led me to believe." So he taught her. He took both her cold hands in his gloved ones and skated backward, slowly, drawing her out onto the black glass under the enormous moon, and she gripped his hands and shrieked and laughed and found her feet. And the estate watched their master and his betrothed go slowly down the length of the ice hand in hand. And below stairs that night it was agreed by everyone from the butler to the boot boy that whatever the newspapers said and however sudden it had been, this was no cold arranged thing but a genuine article, a love match. Anyone could see it. Look how he held her hands. And Julian, holding her cold hands in the moonlight with her face turned to his and lit with a joy he had put there, felt the lost strut of his careful architecture give way somewhere deep beneath him, silently, the way ice gives before it cracks, and he did not know it had gone. Only that the night felt suddenly perilous and wide, and that he did not want it to end, and that he was, for the first time in 3 years, entirely and dangerously alive. They fell, of course. Near the far bank, where the ice had a treacherous seam, Marianne's feet went out from under her, and she took Julian down with her, and they landed together in a heap on the hard black glass in a tangle of cloak and skirts and laughter, and for a moment, half a moment, before they righted themselves, before the world came back, Julian found himself lying on the ice with his face very close to hers, close enough to see the frost on her lashes and the flush the cold had put in her cheeks and the laughter dying in her eyes into something else, something still and startled and wanting. And he understood that he had only to close the last inch to kiss her, that no one on the distant bank could see, that she would not stop him, that some part of her was asking him to, and the old terror rose, and he did not close the inch. He got to his feet instead, and helped her up briskly, and made some dry remark about the state of his grandfather's skates, and led her back up the ice to the safety of the crowd. But he had felt it, and she had felt him feel it and choose not to. He saw the small door east shut in her face again, the same door he had watched close by the library fire, and he hated himself for closing it and did not know how to open it, and told himself, all the long walk back up to the house, that it was better so. That a stolen kiss would only complicate a thing built to be dissolved, that he was protecting her. He was not protecting her, he was protecting himself, and he knew it, and the knowing sat in him like a splinter for the rest of the night. The society performance, meanwhile, had taken on a life that neither of them fully controlled. The county had made up its mind about them, and the county's mind, once made up, was a weather system, not a decision. Everywhere they went now they were received not as a curiosity but as a triumph, the great cold Duke redeemed, the clever heroine who had done it, a love story handed to a bored winter neighborhood like a gift. Old women pressed Marianne's hands and told her she had done a Christian work. Young men who had feared Julian for a decade thawed toward him and spoke to him of dogs and drainage as though he were an ordinary squire. An invitation came for them to open the New Year assembly at Markholt together, at the head of the room, a place of honor reserved by immemorial custom for the county's most distinguished couple, and Julian accepted it before he had thought, and only afterward understood that he had just agreed to lead his hired betrothed out before 400 people, as though they were the truest lovers in the shire, and that the prospect did not dismay him in the least, which dismayed him considerably. "We are getting very good at this," Marianne observed on the drive home from one such evening, her face turned to the dark window. She said it lightly, but there was something under the lightness, a probing, careful edge. "Two GURPS. I begin to lose the seam, Julian. There was a night at the start when I could feel exactly where the performance stopped and I began, and I could step across the line at will and step back. I cannot find the line any longer. I do not know, half the time, whether I am playing your betrothed for the room or simply sitting beside you because I would rather sit beside you than anywhere on earth. That is a dangerous thing to lose track of. I only mention it. You need not answer. I am aware you have a locked room, and I am aware that this is precisely the sort of thing that knocks upon its door, and I am aware you would rather I did not knock. I will not. But I thought you should know the line has moved on my side of it, and I do not think I can move it back." And Julian, who had lost the line himself before and had been lying to them both about it ever since, said, "The room is very cold, and the drive is long, and you should rest," which was not an answer, and was not a denial, and was the closest he could come, in that black rocking carriage, to admitting that the line had moved on his side too, and that he was standing on the far side of it, in the country of wanting, with no idea in the world how to get home. He began, in those days, to do small things for her that served no purpose the arrangement could name. He had her father's books traced and bought back from the dealers her uncle had sold them to, and he had them shelved, quietly, in the small library, and he said nothing, and one evening she came in and found them, her father's hand still in the margins. And she stood very still before the shelf for a long time and did not turn around, and Julian, at the desk, pretended to read and watched the back of her neck and did not know what he had started. He learned that she took a tea without sugar and had done since a winter when there had been none, and he saw to it that there was always at her place a small dish of the candied violets he had discovered by accident that she loved and would never have asked for. He noticed which of her worn gowns she favored and did not, as any ordinary betrothed would have done, drown her in new silk. Instead he had that one gown quietly, expertly mended and retrimmed, so that it came back to her the same gown, only whole, and she understood the difference, and looked at him across the breakfast table when it came and said nothing, and her eyes were bright. These were not the acts of a man buying a war. He knew it. He knew it the way one knows a fever is coming, in the body before the mind. He had built the whole arrangement on the principle that a woman who did not want him was safe, and he had discovered the flaw in it too late, which was that the principle said nothing whatever about whether he might come to want her, and he did, hopelessly, entirely, more with every candied violet and every mended hem and every night by the library fire, and the wanting was the lever, and he had sworn never again to hand the world the lever, and he was handing it over daily with both hands, and calling it a business arrangement. The Dowager Duchess Augusta, who missed nothing, cornered him in the gun-room 3 days before Christmas Eve. "You are a great fool, Julian," she said, without preamble, warming her old bones at the fire. "You have found the one woman in England worth the having, and you go about the house looking at her like a man watching a house burn that he might have saved and did not. I have been watching you both for a fortnight. She loves you. She does not know I know it, and she would die sooner than say it, being proud, as she has every right to be. And you love her, and you do know I know it, and you are frightened out of your wits, which is the first sensible sign of life you have shown since the fever." She fixed him with her terrible eye. "I am 71 years old. I have buried a husband, 2 brothers, your father, your mother, and the girl on the hill whose name we do not say. I know precisely what it is to love a thing you may lose, for I have lost every last one of them, and I will tell you the secret of it, nephew. The secret that took me half a century and a great many graves to learn. and I will tell it you for nothing because you are the last of us, and I have not the time to watch you learn it slowly. It is this: the losing is coming regardless. Whether you love or whether you do not, the losing is coming for all of us. It is the one appointment none of us breaks. And so the only question that was ever worth asking is not whether to risk the loss. The loss is not a risk, it is a certainty. The only question is whether, when it comes, you will have loved first out loud and had the having of it, or whether you will have spent your one warm life standing outside the fire to spare yourself the cold that is coming for you anyway. She rose stiffly and gripped his arm on her way to the door. You built her a church, Julian, the other one. You gave a dead woman the vow you were too great a coward to give her living. Do not do it twice. There is a living woman under your roof this Christmas, and she is worth 10 churches. And if you let her walk away in the spring to save yourself a grief that is coming for you whether or no, then you are not my nephew, and you are not your mother's son, and you deserve the cold you have chosen, and I will not weep at your funeral, for you will have been dead these many years already and merely neglected to be buried. And she went out and left him alone in the gun room with the fire and the truth, and Julian stood there a long time, and did not even then go and find Marianne and say the words. Because the terror was old and deep and had built him, he did not yet know that a man can act against the thing that built him. That knowledge was still 3 days off, and it would cost him a broken engagement and a walk up a frozen hill to buy it. But the dowager's words went into him and lodged there, next to the splinter of the ice, and they did their slow work in the dark. And when the hour came at last on Christmas morning and he stood bareheaded in the snow with the ring in his hand, it was his old aunt's voice he heard, telling him the losing was coming regardless, and only the loving was a choice. There was, too, the matter of the letters. Josiah Bexley had not accepted his defeat with grace. A man who has spent 11 years slowly digesting his niece's fortune does not sit quietly by while it is snatched, whole and unchewed, from his very throat, and though the deed to Fenwick was signed and sealed and beyond his legal reach, Bexley had discovered, as the disappointed always do, that where the law affords no remedy, there is always the alternative of poison. The letters began to arrive a week before Christmas, addressed to Julian in a florid clerkly hand, each one longer and more aggrieved than the last, and each one bent to the single purpose of convincing the Duke of Ivesley that he had been most cruelly deceived. Julian read the first 2 and burned them. He read the third because Marianne came upon him with it in his hand and would not let him hide it. "If it concerns me," she said, "and it plainly does, for you have gone the colour of tallow, then I will read it, Julian, or I will imagine something worse than whatever it says. And I have a very good imagination and 11 years' practice at fearing my uncle. Give it here." And so he gave it her, and stood by while she read her uncle's careful venom, the insinuations that she was not the modest creature she appeared, that there had been a scandal in her girlhood hushed at great expense, that a Duke of Julian's consequence was being made a fool of by a scheming spinster and her grasping relations, that Bexley wrote only out of Christian duty and a tender concern for a great family's honour. It was all lies and clumsy lies, and Marianne read them with a face of stone and set the letter down on the desk and smoothed it flat with her palm as though ironing it, and said, "He is very angry. I have never known him to be angry before, only cold. I find I prefer him angry. It is the first honest thing he has ever shown me." Then she looked up. "You did not answer them." "I burned the first 2, Julian said, "and I shall burn this, and every one that follows, and if he does not desist by 12th night, I shall have Paget write him a letter of the kind that ends a man's letter writing for good. He is trying to break the betrothal. He has worked out, for he is stupid but not so stupid as that if he can make me doubt you before Christmas, the marriage fails and the estate reverts and he has his farms back. He does know the deed is already yours, absolute, whatever becomes of us. I have not told him, because I find I enjort of his labouring so hard to poison a well that ran dry for him a fortnight ago." He took the letter from under her hand and fed it to the fire, and they watched it curl and blacken together. "But I will tell you why the letters do not touch me, Marianne, and it is not because I am a great man too proud to heed them. It is because I have watched you for a fortnight. I have watched you learn 9 servants' names in a night, and send solve to a scullery maid you had no reason to notice, and mend a schoolroom roof for children you will likely never. He stopped. He had been about to say children you will likely never see grow, and the phrase had opened, without warning, onto the whole vista of a future he had told himself he would not have, a future in which he did see them grow, in which Marianne was mistress of Ivesley in earnest and not for a winter, and he could not finish the sentence, and she saw him not finish it. And neither of them spoke of what the unfinished sentence had shown them both. He cannot poison you to me, Julian said at last, differently, more quietly, because I know you. That is the whole of it. A lie can only enter where the truth is thin, and I have spent a fortnight filling myself with the truth of you, until there is no room left for anything he could send. Burn his letters unread, if more come. They are addressed to a man who no longer exists, the man who signed a contract with a stranger over a frozen fountain and thought her a convenience. That man is dead, Marianne. I do not quite know yet what has replaced him. But it is not a man who could be made to doubt you by Josiah Bexley, and I find that a great comfort, and I thought you should have the comfort too. It was the nearest he had yet come to telling her. He knew it as he said it, and she knew it as she heard it. And the room went very still around the small honest thing he had let slip, and for a moment Julian stood on the very threshold of the locked door with his hand upon the latch, and then some old reflex, some 3-year habit of the heart, drew his hand back. And he turned the moment aside with a remark about the cold and the hour, and the door stayed shut, and Marianne let it, because she had promised she would, though he saw what it cost her to keep the promise, and hated himself, and said nothing, as he always said nothing where it mattered. That was the pattern of those middle days, the reaching and the drawing back, the truth rising to the surface and being pressed down again, the two of them circling a fire that each was afraid to be the first to name, and all the while the season wound tighter toward Christmas. And the house grew warmer, and the servants grew fonder, and the county grew sorer, and the dowager grew more impatient, and the ice on the long water thawed and refroze, and somewhere in the frozen dark to the north Josiah Bexley licked his wounds and plotted. And somewhere to the south a claret carriage was ordered and made ready, and all the pieces of the reckoning that was coming moved quietly into their places, while a duke, and the woman he would not let himself love, sat up night after night by a library fire, talking of everything but the one thing, running out of winter. Julian understood dimly that it could not hold. A thing wound so tight must spring, a truth pressed down so hard must surface. A fire denied its name must either be named or go out, and this one was not going to go out. He knew that much, whatever else he did not know. He lay awake in the great cold state bed each night, and listened to the house settle in the frost, and thought about the woman 2 corridors away, and reckoned in the cold cataloguing part of him that had run the estate through 3 years of grief, the sums of he felt, and found, as he had found on the first night over the fountain, that the sums no longer cancelled. They had never cancelled, perhaps. He had only wanted them to. He had come to Lockmoor looking for a distraction, a convenient betrothed, a wall against the hunt, and he had found instead the one thing his whole careful frozen life had been constructed to keep out, and it had walked in through the very door he had built to keep it out, wearing a 2-year-old gown and a look that was not impressed by weather, and now it was too late to keep it out. And he knew that too, and he lay in the dark and was afraid, and did not yet know that the fear was not the enemy, that the fear was only the price of the thing, and that the thing was worth it, and that he would learn before the year was out, on a hill in the snow, exactly how much. The rival arrived on the 23rd of December, in a travelling carriage the colour of claret, and her name was Lady Sabine Corville, and she had once, a long time ago, expected to be the Duchess of Ivesley. Julian saw the carriage from the study window and felt the old cold close over him like water. He had forgotten she was in the country. He had schooled himself so thoroughly to forget her that the sight of the claret carriage cracking up the frozen avenue took him a full moment to interpret, the way a familiar word looks foreign when stared at too long. Sabine Corville had been the great beauty of his youth, and the woman his father had chosen for him, and Julian, at 24, dutiful and unformed, had very nearly gone through with it. Then his father had died, and Julian had come into himself, and had understood at last that Sabine did not want him but the coronet, and had ended it, cleanly, coldly, and with a settlement generous enough to keep the county from talking. She had married the elderly Baron Corville within the year, and buried him within 5, and had spent the decade since as a rich, restless, dangerous widow who had never once forgiven Julian for slipping the noose she had cast, and who had a memory for grievance as long as a debt collector's ledger. And she knew about Eleanor. That was the thing that turned the cold water to ice. Of every soul alive, Sabine Corville was the one who knew, because she had been in the country that terrible Michaelmas, had seen him at the graveside, had guessed the whole of it from the way he stood, and had said to him afterward in the churchyard, in a voice like silk drawn over a blade, so the great cold Duke of Ivesley had a heart after all, and hid it in a governess's daughter, and dared not even give her his name before he lost her. How very like you, Julian, to grieve a woman you had not the courage to claim. I shall keep your little secret. I keep all my treasures. And she had kept it these 3 years, the way a person keeps a loaded pistol, not for the pleasure of owning it, but against the day she might have use for it. Julian. Marianne was in the study doorway. She had come to fetch him for the tenants' dinner and had followed his stare to the window. Who is that? You have gone the colour of the frost. An old acquaintance, said Julian, and heard how badly he lied when it mattered, when it was not a rehearsed line but a true thing to be hidden, who was not invited and who has never in her life required an invitation, Lady Corville. She and I were, it was understood once long ago that we should marry. It came to nothing. She has not forgiven the nothing. He turned from the window. She is here to make trouble, Marianne. I do not yet know what kind. But I know her, and I know that carriage, and I would ask you to be on your guard tonight, as you have not had to be with any of the rest of them. The others came to sneer. She has come to hunt. Marianne looked at him steadily. And is there a thing for her to find? The question hung in the warm study, plain and terrible. And Julian, who had sworn no falsehood between us, who had broken it a dozen times in the withholding, who had one clean moment now in which to open the locked room before an enemy's hand could force it, looked at the woman he had begun against every provision of the contract to love and said, there is nothing for her to find but an old vanity and a colder pride. Do not fear her, only do not trust her. And he took her arm and led her down to the tenants' dinner, and told himself for the 100th time that Eleanor was his own and not the winter's business, and did not see, because he had trained himself so well not to look at, that the locked door in him had just become the exact size and shape of the weapon Sabine Corville was carrying up his own stairs. The tenants' dinner was the great warm event of Ivesley's Christmas. The one night the whole estate came into the hall, the farmers and their wives, the shepherds down from the high pasture, the school children, the old pensioners, all of them fed at the master's long tables under the green ropes Marianne had hung. With a fire in the great hearth you could have roasted an ox in, and very nearly had. Julian had dreaded it in the years since Eleanor, and had performed it grimly, a duty done. Tonight, with Marianne beside him and the hall full of people who had, in the space of a fortnight, come to adore her, he found the dread had gone out of it entirely. And he sat at the head of his own table with a plate of honest goose in front of him, and the Var's wife no longer frightened, and old Mrs. Dean's knees propped on a stool, and Marianne laughing at something a shepherd's boy had said, and he thought, with a plainness that stopped his fork halfway to his mouth, I am happy. I have not been happy in 3 years, and I am happy now, and it is because of her, and it is going to end in the spring by a contract I signed with my own hand. And across the hall at the far end where the local gentry sat, Lady Sabine Corville watched him think it. He felt her watching. He had felt her watching all evening, the claret gown and the cold brise moving over Marianne, over the green ropes, over the loving crowded hall, cataloguing it all with the patient attention of a woman assembling a case. And when the long tables had been cleared, and the fiddler struck up, and the old and the young alike rose to dance the country measures that had been danced in that hall for 200 Christmases, Sabine rose too, and crossed the room, and came to stand beside Julian in the shadow of the great hearth, while Marianne was drawn off to dance with the delighted school children. She is charming, Sabine said, truly. I did not expect to like her, and I do not, but I can see that she is charming, and that you are in love with her, which is more than you ever managed for me. She turned her bright cold eyes on him. It is the most extraordinary thing, Julian. 3 years you have gone about the world a block of ice, breaking the hearts of every mother in England, and now here you sit mooning over a governess that nearly was like a boy of 19. One wonders what changed. One wonders whether it is the girl at all, or only that you have found a way at last to keep from marrying. She smiled. I do read the announcements, my dear. I know a betrothal by half a lifetime's practice. And I know you. You do not fall in a fortnight. You did not fall for me in a year. So either the ice has genuinely melted for this little nobody with the clever eyes, or the betrothal is a fraud, and you have hired yourself a bride to keep off the hunt, exactly as a clever cold man would. I wonder very much which it is. I mean to find out. And whichever it proves, I shall have such a use for it. Julian kept his face still. It was the hardest thing he had done in 3 years, and he did it. You always did prefer a mystery to a plain fact, Sabine, because a mystery you can improve upon and a fact you cannot. Enjoy the wondering. It is the only part of my high house you will be permitted to keep. He inclined his head with perfect courtesy. The dancing is beginning. You will excuse me. My betrothed is looking for me, which was a lie, because Marianne was not looking for him, but as he said it, Marianne did look for him. Across the whole crowded firelit hall, her face flushed and laughing from the dance, and found him, and her expression changed to something warm and private and entirely unperformed, meant for no audience at all, only for him, and Julian felt it land in his chest like a blow. And he left Sabine Corville standing in the shadow of the hearth and walked the length of his own hall to the woman he was not permitted to want, and did not care, for once, who saw him do it. That night, when the hall was cleared and the tenants gone home over the snow and the house sunk into its enormous frozen quiet, they sat up as they always did, in the small library with the fire low. But it was different tonight. Sabine had put something in the room that would not leave, not fear exactly, but a sense of the thin ice they stood upon, the winter closing in around a warmth that had no right to last. Marianne was quiet for a long time, watching the fire, and then she said, without turning her head, I broke a rule tonight. Which of our rules? Not one of the written ones. She drew her shawl closer. The unwritten one. The one I made for myself when we shook hands over that dreadful frozen fountain, which was that I would perform this and not feel it, that I would take my estate and hold my heart and walk away in the spring the way one walks away from a play, warmed and untouched. I broke it tonight, Julian. I looked for you across the hall, and I found you, and I was glad in the plain, unguarded way of a person who has forgotten they are pretending, and I understood, in that moment, that I have stopped pretending, and I do not know when I stopped. And I cannot start again. She turned to him at last, and her face in the low firelight was not the composed mask she showed the world, but the true one, the tired, honest one, and it was frightened, and it was brave, and it broke his heart. I am in love with you. I did not mean to be. It was not in the contract. Indeed, it was expressly against the spirit of it. I tell you not, because I expect anything. I expect nothing. I have made a life's practice of expecting nothing, but because I promised you no falsehood between us, and I have kept that promise, and I would rather lose everything with the truth in my mouth than keep it all with a lie. There. It is said. You need not answer. I know what we agreed. I know there is a locked room in you that this can never enter. I only could not sit in this firelight one more night and let you think I was still safe, when I am not safe, when I have not been safe for a fortnight, when I am the least safe I have been in my whole guarded life, and would not undo a moment of it. The fire settled. The great house creaked in the frost, and Julian, who loved her, who had known he loved her since the morning she stood on the stepladder with holly in her hair, who had one clean and shining moment now in which to say it back and open the locked room and let the whole cold winter of his heart go out at once, felt the old terror rise in him like black water, the terror of wanting a thing the world could take, the terror of standing at another altar and meaning it and losing it, the terror that had frozen him for 3 years and had built a church at the top of a hill and had signed a contract expressly designed to keep any woman from ever reaching him again. And the terror won. It won as it had won every time since Eleanor. He heard himself say, in the flat cold voice he had used on the last step of the Larkmoor stair, the voice that had never once failed to protect him, we had an agreement, Marianne. In the spring we part. I am sorry, I am more sorry than I can tell you, but I cannot give you what you ask. There is a reason, and it is mine, and I will not open it even for you. Do not love me. I am not, I have nothing in me to love you back with. It was burned out of me a long time ago, and there is only the arrangement, and the ring, and the spring. He rose. He could not look at her. Forgive me. You should go up. It is very late. And he walked out of the only warm room in his enormous cold house and left the woman he loved sitting alone by the dying fire with the truth in her mouth and nothing to show for it, and he climbed the great dark stair to his own rooms. And he stood at the window looking out over the moonlit snow toward the black shape of the church at the top of the hill, and he understood, with a clarity that gave him no comfort whatever, that he had just done the cruelest thing of his life, and the most cowardly, and that he had done it to the one person who had never once been cruel or cowardly to him, and that he would give the whole of Ivesley to take it back, and had not the courage even now to walk back down the stairs and try. Sabine Corville struck on Christmas Eve, and she struck at Marianne, because a clever hunter does not fire at the quarry it cannot wound. Julian did not see it happen. That was the cruelty of it. That he was at the far end of the long drawing-room being detained by the vicar over the matter of the schoolroom roof while, in the window embrasure by the grate the household had cut and hung with candles and gilded nuts and paper roses, Lady Sabine Corville sat down beside his betrothed and, in a voice pitched for two, told her everything. He reconstructed it only afterward, from Marianne's white stillness across the room and from the single glance Sabine sent him over a fan, a look of such perfect, satisfied cruelty that he knew the whole of it in an instant, the way one knows, waking, that a house is on fire. Sabine had told her about Eleanor. Of course she had. She had told her about the governess's daughter Julian had loved and hidden and lost, about the church at the top of the hill and the grave beneath its floor, about the ring he had never given and the heart he had buried 3 years since. And she had told it, Julian did not doubt, in the way most calculated to wound, not as a tragedy, but as a proof, the proof that the great cold Duke could love had loved, but never this one, never the clever nobody he had hired to keep off the hunt. That Marianne was not a beloved, but a convenience, a stand-in, a warm body between Julian and the marriage market, cherished exactly as much as a well-made lock is cherished, and no more. She has your ring. Julian could all but hear the silken voice saying, but he built a church for the other one. He does not build churches for the help. He crossed the room too late. By the time he had disentangled himself from the vicar, Sabine had risen and drifted away to the card tables, her work done, and Marianne was sitting alone in the window embrasure with the candlelit fur behind her and her hands, for once not still, pressed together in her lap so hard the knuckles stood white, and her face composed into the flat, terrible, unbothered courtesy she had worn the first night in the conservatory. The mask she put on when the ship was sinking and she had decided to go down without being seen to mind. Marianne. No, she said, very low, not looking at him, still smiling faintly at the room the way a hostess smiles. Not in front of them. I have given these people a great many things this fortnight, Julian, but I will not give them this. Smile at me. There is a woman by the fire who has been watching us for 10 minutes and would give her pearls to see me weep. She will not see it. Take my hand and lead me out as though nothing at all has happened, and God help you if you say one kind word before that door is shut, 'cause I am holding this together with both hands, and a kind word will bring the whole of it down in front of 40 people. He took her hand. It was ice. He led her out of the drawing-room, unhurried, murmuring some nothing about the cold and an early night, and the door shut behind them, and the moment it shut she took her hand out of his as though his had burned her, and walked ahead of him down the long, dark gallery hung with her own green ropes, and did not stop until they reached the small library, the warm room, the room where 3 hours before she had told him she loved him, and only then did she turn, and only then did the mask come off, and it was not tears underneath it. Marianne, who had wept twice in 11 years, did not weep now. It was something far worse, a still white fury with grief inside it like a stone inside snow. A church, she said. You built her a church. You told me you had built a church at the top of the hill and that you did not go there, and you let me not ask, and I did not ask, because I trusted you, because we agreed no falsehood between us, and I am fool enough that I believed a duke's word given over a frozen fountain. Eleanor. Her name was Eleanor. I had to learn her name from your enemy, in your own drawing room on Christmas Eve, while you talked to the vicar about a roof. Her voice did not rise. That was the terrible thing. It stayed low and level, and it cut like the cold. You have a locked room, you said. You would not open it even for me, you said. And I honored that. I honored it, Julian. I never once tried the handle. I asked you nothing. I let you keep your dead in peace because I thought that was what love without possession looked like. But it was not a locked room. It was a lie. There is a difference, and you have spent a fortnight teaching it to me. A locked room, you say I may not enter and I stay out. A lie you furnish so that I may live in it comfortably and never know I am living in a fraud. You told me there was nothing for her to find but old vanity and colder pride. You looked me in the face and you said it. And all the while there was a grave under a church at the top of your own hill with the whole truth of you buried in it. And you would rather your enemy dig it up in front of me on Christmas Eve than tell me yourself in the safety of this fire. Marianne. I understand it now, she went on over him, relentless, quiet. I understand the whole of it. Why me? Why a stranger? Why the woman who does not want you is the only safe partner in a false betrothal? You told me that yourself the first night. I thought it clever. I thought it honest. I did not understand that you were not describing a strategy. You were describing a wound. That you chose a woman you could not love because you had sworn never to love again. That you built this whole arrangement not to keep off the mothers but to keep off your own heart. And that I was never a person to you at all, Julian. I was a wall. A well-made lock. Something to stand between you and the fear of ever again wanting a thing that could die. She drew one long breath. And the cruelty of it, the cruelty I will never forgive. Not the deception. I could forgive the deception. God knows I have forgiven worse. The cruelty is that it worked in reverse. You hired a wall and the wall fell in love with you. And you knew it. You have known it for a fortnight. Watching me learn your house and love your servants and hang your ugly gallery with green. And you let it go on, because it was warm and it cost you nothing. And you told yourself you were protecting me by keeping your locked room shut, when the truth is you were only protecting yourself. As you have protected yourself from every living soul since the fever took her, and you would have gone on doing it until the spring, and let me walk away in April, still not knowing whether I had loved a man or a monument. The fire cracked. Julian stood in the middle of the warm room and did not defend himself, because there was no defense, because every word she said was true and truer than she knew, and because the thing rising in him now was not the old cold terror at all, but something else. Something that had been damned for 3 years, and had been quietly cracking its dam all fortnight, and now, in the face of her fury and her grief and her devastating rightness, broke. Her name was Eleanor, he said, and we were never betrothed. That is the part your enemy could not tell you, because she does not know it, because no one knows it. I loved her for 2 years, and I never asked her. The letter was on my desk. I was going to ask her at Michaelmas, and the fever came in the spring and took her in 11 days. And I stood at the top of that hill with a ring in my pocket, and I understood that I'd loved her completely and told her nothing and let her die not knowing, because I was cautious, because I was a duke and dukes do not rush, because there was always going to be time. His voice was not level now. 3 years of it was coming up at once, and he could not have stopped it if the house were burning down around them. And I swore, over her grave, in the church I built because I could not bear that she should have no monument when I had given her not even my name. I swore I would never again love a thing I might lose. Do you understand? It was not that I loved her too much to love again. It was that I had loved her badly, cautiously too late, and I could not bear the proof of my own cowardice. And so I made cowardice into a principle and called it grief, and wore it like armor for 3 years. And it worked, Marianne. It worked perfectly. No one ever got past it. Until a woman I met at 11 o'clock at night looked at me over a frozen fountain as though weather did not impress her, and I climbed the stairs again, and I have been thawing ever since, every single day, and it has terrified me past bearing, because I know now, I have known for a fortnight, that if I let myself love you, and I lost you, it would not be like Eleanor. It would be worse, because with Eleanor I never spoke. And with you I would have to speak. I would have to stand at an altar and mean every word and give you my name and my whole undefended heart. And then some fever. Some carriage, some winter I cannot foresee could take you, and I would have loved you completely and openly, and it would still not have been enough. And I did not. I could survive learning a second time that love is not a wall that keeps death out. That is my secret, Marianne. That is the locked room. Not that I loved a woman and lost her. That I am a coward who would rather deceive the person he loves than risk loving her out loud. Marianne was very still now, and white, and she had heard all of it, every word, and Julian saw it land, and saw that it changed nothing. Because he had told her too late, in the wrong room, only after his enemy had forced the door, and the truth arriving too late is not truth at all, but merely the corpse of it. Then we are both of us cowards, she said at last, very quietly, and the quiet was worse than any shouting could have been. For I have spent my whole life not wanting things so that the world could not use my wanting against me, and you have spent 3 years not loving things so that death could not use your loving against you, and we found each other. 2 frightened people who had each perfected the art of touching nothing, and we thought we were safe, and we were not, and now here we are. She untied from her wrist the ribbon that held the betrothal ring. She had worn it there, indoors, so as not to lose it from a finger grown thin with a hard winter, and she set the ring on the mantel, between them in the firelight, where it lay and burned like a small cold eye. I cannot do the spring, Julian. I thought I could. I was wrong. I cannot stand beside you for 3 more months performing a tenderness I feel in earnest for a man who has decided, on principle, never to feel it back. That is not a bargain. That is a slow execution, and I have had 11 years of slow executions under my uncle's roof, and I will not sign on for another under yours. Not for all the estates in England. The deed is mine, you saw to that. You were honourable in the one thing that could be done on paper. I will go to Fenwick in the morning. We will contrive the kind clean story we promised each other, and no one will be the villain and no one the fool, and I will keep it for the rest of my life as I said I would. She picked up her shawl. Her hands, he saw, had gone still again, perfectly, terribly still. Good night, Julian, and happy Christmas. I did mean the green, that was not performed. Whatever else was, the green was for the house, and the house deserved it, whatever its master deserved. And she walked out of the small, warm library on Christmas Eve, and left the ring burning on the mantel, and Julian stood alone in the only warm room in his enormous cold house, and listened to her footsteps go away down the gallery she had hung with her own hands, and did not go after her, because the old terror still had him by the throat even now, even here, even at the very end, and outside the tall windows the snow began again over the moonlit park, falling and falling on the black shape of the church at the top of the hill, where a woman named Eleanor slept under the floor, and had slept for 3 years, waiting for a man too much a coward to say the words to the living that he had built a whole church to say to the dead. Julian did not sleep. He sat in the small library until the fire was ash, with the ring on the mantel and the snow at the window, and somewhere past 3 in the morning he understood that he had been sitting in that room waiting for the terror to lift, the way he had waited 3 years for it to lift, and that it was never going to lift, because it was not a thing that lifted. It was a thing you walked into. Eleanor had not died of his fear, and Marianne would not be kept by it. The terror was not the price of love. The terror was only the terror, and a man could feel it entire and act against it anyway, and that, he saw it plainly at last. In the grey ash light of Christmas morning, that was the whole of what he had failed to understand at the top of the hill 3 years ago. He had thought courage was the absence of fear. It was not. It was the ring in the pocket taken out and offered with the fear still roaring in your ears. He rose, his whole body ached with the cold. He took the ring from the mantel and put it in his breast pocket, over his heart, where the letter to Eleanor had once lain unsent, and he went out into the black and silver morning without a coat, and he did the one thing he had not done in 3 years. He walked up the hill to the church. The snow was deep and the sky was going the pale gold of a winter dawn, and the church at the top of the hill stood small and grey against it, and Julian pushed open the frozen door and went into the cold and the dimness and the smell of stone and old candle wax. And he walked up the short aisle to the slab in the floor with the marble name on it, and he stood there, and for the first time in 3 years he spoke to her. "I am sorry," he said to the stone in the empty church, with his breath smoking in the cold. "I am sorry I never told you. I have spent 3 years believing. I honored you by never loving again, and I understand now that I dishonored you twice over, once by not speaking when you lived, and once by using your memory as a wall to hide behind, which you would have hated, Eleanor. You would have been so angry with me. You who were braver than I ever was, told me you loved me long before I found the courage to say it back. I built you a church because I could not build you a marriage, and I have knelt behind it like a coward for 3 years. And there is a woman down the hill who is worth the whole of my undefended heart, and I nearly did to her exactly what I did to you. I nearly let her go without the words, out of fear, out of caution, because there was always going to be time. There is never going to be time. You taught me that and I forgot it. I will not forget it twice." He laid his gloveless hand flat on the cold stone. "Goodbye, my dear. Truly this time. I am going to go down the hill, and I am going to be afraid the whole way, and I am going to say the words anyway. It is 3 years too late for you. I will not let it be 1 hour too late for her." And he turned and he walked out of the church into the gold dawn, and he did not lock the door behind him, because a thing you have made your peace with does not need locking. The claret carriage was standing before the doors of Ivesley when he came down the hill, horses stamping in the cold, and Marianne's small trunk was being carried out. And Lady Sabine Corville stood upon the steps in her travelling furs with an expression of such complacent triumph that Julian understood she had waited, deliberately, to witness the departure, had made it her business to be present at the exact moment her Christmas Eve's work bore its fruit and the nobody was driven from the great house in disgrace. She had won, her face said. She had proven the betrothal a fraud, or near enough. She had broken the warm, impossible thing that had made her own cold decade look like the waste it was, and now she would carry the whole delicious story back to town and the county would ring with it by 12th night. Marianne was on the steps, cloaked and gloved, saying a low word to Mrs. Dean, who was weeping openly, which Julian had never in his life seen the housekeeper do, and the Dowager Duchess Augusta stood in the great doorway, wrapped in a shawl, watching everything with her 2 terrible eyes, saying nothing, waiting, Julian understood with a jolt, waiting for him, giving him the one silence in which the thing might still be saved, the way she had given him 11 minutes at her own dinner table a fortnight ago. He crossed the snow. Sabine saw him first, and something flickered in her bright face, surprise, and then a swift recalculation, and then the cool readiness of a duellist who has been handed a second shot. "Julian," she said, "you are without a coat, and barefoot in the snow very nearly. How wild you look. Come to see her off. It is prettily done of you. I confess I did not think you had it in you to face the—" "Marianne," Julian said. He did not look at Sabine. He would never really look at Sabine again. He came to the foot of the steps and looked up at the woman standing above him with her small trunk being loaded behind her, and 40 people, the household, the grooms, the dowager, the enemy, stood frozen in the cold morning to watch a duke make a fool of himself. And he found he did not care about a single one of them. "Marianne, do not get in the carriage. Or get in it, if you must, and I will follow it to Fenwick and stand in your yard and say this through your window, and go on saying it every morning until you are so tired of the sound of me that you marry me only to have some quiet. But I would rather say it here, now, in front of all of them, because I have spent 3 years saying nothing where it mattered, and I find I have a great deal saved up." "Julian," Marianne said very low, "do not in front of everyone," he said, "especially in front of everyone. You held your grief in front of 40 people on Christmas Eve because you would not give them your heart to sneer at, and it was the bravest thing I ever saw, and I have decided to be brave in exactly the way you taught me, which is out loud. And where it costs something." He took the ring from his breast pocket. It caught the low gold light. "I told you there was nothing in me to love you back with. I lied. It was the last and worst of all my lies, and I take it back now, in front of my aunt and my house and my enemy and God. There is everything in me to love you with. There has been since you stood on that stepladder with holly in your hair and did not know I was watching. I built the whole of this arrangement to keep from feeling exactly what I feel standing here, and it failed, thank God. It failed completely. Because you are not a wall, Marianne, you were never a wall, you are the fire. My aunt saw it in an hour, and it took me a fortnight and a walk up a hill in the snow, but I see it now. I love you, not for the winter, not for the performance, for the whole of my undefended life. If you will have a coward who took 3 years and 1 dead woman's forgiveness to learn how to say it, marry me. Not by Christmas. Christmas was your uncle's clock, and your uncle is beaten, and the estate is yours, whatever you answer. Marry me, because I cannot warm this house without you, and never could and do not wish to try. Marry me in earnest. That is the whole of my secret, and I have no others left, and I am standing in the snow with no coat to prove it. The morning was utterly silent. Even the horses had stopped stamping. Marianne stood on the steps with her cloak drawn round her and her hands. Julian saw it, and his heart turned over. Her hands were not still. They were shaking. She was not holding anything at very great cost any longer. She had set the cost down. You built her a church, she said, and her voice shook too, and did not go to it for 3 years. And you have snow in your hair and no coat, and you have just made a spectacle of yourself before your entire household, and Lady Corville is going to tell the whole of the county, and you did it anyway. I went to the church this morning, Julian said. I said goodbye. Properly. She would have liked you, Marianne. She would have been furious with me for taking so long. She was braver than I am. You are braver than I am. I have spent my whole life surrounded by people braver than I am, and I have finally decided to try to catch them up. He held out the ring, and the hand that held it was steady, though the fear was still roaring in his ears, exactly as he had promised himself on the hill it would be. I am asking you out loud, and in time, and meaning every word. That is all I have. It is everything I have. And Marianne Ashcombe came down the steps of Iversley in the gold Christmas morning, past the weeping housekeeper and the silent dowager and the frozen enemy in her travelling furs, and she stopped in front of the man standing bareheaded in the snow, and she did not take the ring. Instead, she reached up with both her shaking hands, and she took his cold face between them, and she said low, so that only he could hear it, "You are the strangest man I have ever met, and I include my uncle, who dined with his own portrait. And yes, in earnest, in time, out loud. Yes, and then louder, for the whole gold morning to hear, because she had learned from him too, and she was not a woman to be outdone in courage. Yes, Julian, put the wretched ring on my finger before you freeze to death and orphan me on Christmas Day." He put the ring on her finger. And the household broke into a cheer that startled the horses and the rooks out of the leafless limes, and old Mrs. Dean wept harder, and the Dowager Duchess Augusta in the doorway put one bird-claw hand over her mouth and, for the first time in the memory of anyone living, was seen to have tears in her 2 terrible eyes, and Lady Sabine Corville, who had come to watch a nobody driven out in disgrace, and had instead watched a duke fall to his knees in the snow before her, understood that she had lost, completely and publicly and forever, and that the story she carried back to town would not be the one she had planned, but its exact reverse, the story of how the great cold Duke of Iversley had thawed at last and everyone had seen it. She got into her claret carriage without another word, and was driven away down the frozen avenue. And no one watched her go, because everyone was watching the 2 people standing in the snow with their foreheads together, and no one at Iversley ever spoke her name again, which was, for a woman like Sabine Corville, the cruelest fate the world could have devised. They were married on the last day of the year, in the small grey church at the top of the hill, Marianne's choice, and it undid him when she made it. Not despite her, she had said, when he protested that surely she would want a warmer place, a church without a grave in it, because of her. She is part of how you learn to love me. I will not begin my marriage by pretending she was not, or by asking you to hide her away in the cold. Let her be at the wedding. Let there be more locked rooms in you, Julian, not one, not ever. That is the only settlement I want. And so they were married over Eleanor's slab in the gold light of the year's last afternoon, with the whole estate crowded into the little church, and the Dowager Duchess in the front pew straight as a poker and weeping like a girl, and the vicar's no longer frightened wife playing the small organ, and green ropes of holly and ivy, Marianne's ropes, carried up the hill from the great house, hung round the cold stone walls until the little church looked less like a monument and more like a beginning. Afterward, in the great hall of Iversley, which had never in Julian's lifetime been warm and was warm now, thronged and golden and loud, with the fire built up until it roared, and the whole household and half the county feasting under the green. Julian stood for a moment at the edge of it all with his wife's hand in his and watched the house. He had thought he could never warm blaze with light and voices, and he thought of the man he had been 6 weeks before, the frozen man on the lost step of the Larkmoor stair, hunting for a wall to hide behind, and he could hardly believe they were the same person. Marianne followed his gaze round the crowded golden hall and understood, as she understood everything, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, and she said, "It is too large. You cannot possibly warm it." "No," Julian said, and drew her closer, and felt the fear that had ruled him for 3 years finally quietly, and for good, let go its hold. "Not alone. I never could. But I find I'm no longer alone, and it seems the two of us together throw a surprising amount of heat." He raised her hand, the one that wore his ring in earnest now, and pressed his lips to it in front of the whole feasting hall, and did not care who saw, and would never again care who saw. "Happy Christmas, my love, and a happy New Year, and a happy every year out loud, and in time, and in earnest, for the whole of both our undefended lives. It is everything I have. It is yours." Outside, over the moonlit park, the snow had stopped, and the church at the top of the hill stood quiet and unlocked in the starlight, its door open to the cold and its walls hung with green, no longer a place to hide a heart, but only a place where one had learned, 3 years too late and 1 hour into last, to love out loud. And inside the great warm hall the fire burned, and the people sang, and the 7th Duke of Ivesley, who had needed a distraction and been given a whole life instead, danced with his wife until the old year was gone and the new one come, and was, for the first time in that vast cold house, and for every year that followed, entirely and unmistakably warm.